Beyond the Mic with Sean Dillon.
We're joined on the Starline by a journalist at the Washington Post covering the Pentagon and National Security. His first book was The Afghanistan Papers on the post-war reconstruction effort. His latest story is stranger than fiction of a con man who swindled the Navy for years in Fat Leonard. We welcome author Craig Whitlock.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Craig, let's go beyond the mic. As you uncovered the booze-fueled orgies, bribes over 10 years of research, what's the one story you couldn't believe was true?
So, Sean, I had covered the Pentagon for a number of years and knew a lot of senior Navy officers, and these were pretty upstanding, high-integrity people. These were the best and brightest in the Navy. Many of them had gone to the Naval Academy, which is, of course, well known for rectitude and quality of its education. So these were real leaders that Americans admired. And so the more I kept digging into this corruption scandal, I was shocked at the number of them who had befriended this Malaysian defense contractor named Leonard Francis, or Fat Leonard. So many of them had gone to these $1,000 a plate dinners with him, had taken cash bribes, had taken prostitutes. You know, I was just really shocked, given the reputation of these people, that when they were over in Asia during port visits, what they would do there was completely at odds with their public reputation.
You were leaked several terabytes of government data. How far did your stomach sink when reading about this deceit, hubris, and unchecked greed?
Well, this was an extraordinary amount of data I received. These were millions of pages of documents that were assembled by federal agents from the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, from NCIS, which is famous from their TV show, and from the Justice Department. And they had interviewed hundreds of people over a number of years who were swept up in this case, witnesses, suspects, you name it. There were also this extraordinary number of emails and photographs and other documents that Leonard Francis, the corrupt contractor, had kept over the years that were essentially compromising material in all these Navy officers. So when you'd see photographs of Navy officers with prostitutes in their laps, or emails then thanking Leonard Francis, saying thanks for the girls, you know, there's no doubt about what's going on. And the extent of it was what was overwhelming. It took me 2 years just to sift through all that material, the investigative files, to really piece together a coherent narrative of what had happened over a decade.
When Francis was arrested, he wasn't jailed like any other bribery and conspiracy thief, was he?
Well, not later on. Initially, he was. You know, it was extraordinary. He's this big guy. He's 350 pounds, and they had almost like a counterterrorism op to bring him to justice. They had to lure him to the United States with a promise to meet with some admirals, and they had 100 federal agents fan out at Los Angeles airport. They had him under surveillance, and you know, they arrested him. After a couple of years, he pleaded guilty and agreed to cooperate with the Justice Department. So then they started giving him a lot of cushy privileges because he was such a valuable witness. And at one point, he got sick, and he was legitimately sick. He had kidney cancer, but he essentially fooled the judge and the Justice Department into thinking that this was terminal, that he was dying. They thought that their golden goose witness was about to die, so they let him out of jail. And they set him up in a mansion that he paid for with his own money and his own security guards, believe it or not. And he was able to set himself up in pretty high living, despite the fact that he had pleaded guilty as supposed to be a prisoner. Finally, in 2022, right before he was finally supposed to be sentenced, go back to federal prison, he escaped. He was on federal home detention. He had one of these ankle bracelets around his leg, and he snipped it off and walked outside and hailed an Uber, headed to Mexico, then Cuba, then Venezuela. And it was remarkable how easy it was for this crook to escape federal custody. Now, they finally brought him back in December as part of a prisoner swap with the government of Venezuela that the White House orchestrated. So he's back in jail in San Diego. But this was a con man who not only conned the U.S. Navy for years and years, he conned a federal judge and the Justice Department. So you know, you have to give him credit for being a smart guy.
The book is Fat Leonard, and Craig Whitlock joins us beyond the mic for the Rocky Nade. Craig, all this is 8 random questions. Answer with the first thing that comes to your mind. There is no pressure. Which Washington Post colleague is your go-to friend?
My go-to friend's Dave Fallis. He's my editor on the investigations desk, and we've worked together for 25 years.
Admit it, was there a competition between you and your wife to see whose book would sell more copies?
No, she's the by far better author, so she wins on that count.
My dad owned a Carmen Ghia. Why did it take 20 years to get your blue 66 VW Beetle restored?
That's a really good question. I didn't have the money. I had gone overseas for the Washington Post, so I put the Beetle in a barn. And finally, now in middle age, I've able to scrape together enough money to restore this 1966 VW that my aunt bought originally back in the 60s.
You work in media. Makes sense. As a Duke alumni, how much on a scale from 1, a little, to 10, a lot, did you love North Carolina State beating North Carolina for the ACC title?
10, 11 or 12 maybe even.
Craig, how many FOIA requests have you filled out in your lifetime?
Hundreds. FOIAs are Freedom of Information Act requests, which are public record requests for the government. And that's a tool I use time and again on most of my stories.
It's time for the hardest question in the Rocking 8. Yes, no, or kinda. Do you believe that aliens exist?
Kinda.
How do you like to preserve memories?
Photographs, still images, better than video. I grew up with that. I think I'm better at it. My son's, of course, the video age, and he's used to doing that, but I like still photographs.
Speaking of your son, what's the first responsibility did your parents give you as a kid?
Mowing the lawn.
Let's sneak in a couple more with Craig Whitlock, author of Fat Leonard Beyond the Mic. Of all the stories you covered or read, which story troubled you the most as a journalist?
I think the Afghanistan Papers, the degree to which the generals and Pentagon officials and White House officials lied about how the war was going to the American people, even though documents the Washington Post obtained showed that they knew the war was unwinnable and that their strategy didn't make any sense. That to me is still shocking, the degree to which people were giving false statements to the American people about how the war was going.
Who got the justice that they deserved, from the admirals to Fat Leonard?
Not too many. There was only one admiral. There were 91 admirals under investigation in this case for their connections with Fat Leonard, for taking gifts. Only one went to jail. And this was an admiral who Leonard called Crazy Bob. And he actually faked having PTSD in the war zone to avoid being prosecuted in this case, according to his staff. That was really the only admiral who went to jail. He got an 18-month sentence, but scores of other admirals skated on this whole case, which is really one of the shocking findings in the book.
So, what's your next project?
Can't tell you. That's classified. Sorry. Sorry, Sean.
It's time for One Big Question with Craig Whitlock, author of Fat Leonard Beyond the Mic. The U.S. government keeps getting caught doing things it shouldn't. Is it a problem of the people in power or just plain arrogance?
That's a good question. I think a lot of it is arrogance. Once they get into power and they've been there a while, they're removed from the American people and they think they can get away with it. And, that's something I'm proud about as a journalist. Our job is to be a check and balance on people in power. And that's something I've always been proud about, of working at the Washington Post as an investigative reporter. That's really our mission, is whoever is in power, we're the check and balance in our system.
He's filled tons of Freedom of Information Act requests in his lifetime, enjoys taking photographs. Wants you to read his unbelievable book, Fat Leonard. Author Craig Whitlock, thanks for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thanks so much. You're a great interviewer, Sean. Really enjoyed it.
And that, my friends, is a Beyond the Mic shortcut. If you're enjoying these conversations, please check out another Beyond the Mic episode to find more actors, artists, and people you need to know. We'd also appreciate a like and subscribe on the Good Pods app.